Hello everyone, it's Ranger64, and welcome back to another League of Legends lore reading video. Today, we will be reading The Eyes and the Embers by Conor Sheehy. Run! She raced as fast as she could, bloodied feet pounding the earth beneath her. She tore through another thick bramble, more thorns tugging at her ragged clothes, more scratches, more blood, more pain. Her lungs burnt. She gasped for a breath, begged for the rest. But the voice inside demanded more. Run! She fled just yesterday afternoon, but so much had happened since. First, she heard the faculty staff screaming for her from the conservatory grounds. Then, the dogs barking as she scrambled along the banks of the River Gren. Night came, and with it, the distant sound of riders thundering through the dark. She had lost her satchel there, along with the meager pickings she'd stolen from the kitchens of the Ravenbloom Conservatory. 2 apples, a torn heel of bread, and a half block of cheese that smelled like it had come all the way from Noxus. Enough to get her to safety, but barely. God, how the hunger gnaws. She picked berries, chewed on twigs, drank the rainwater from leaves. There was so little peace. Every moment she paused, every time she allowed the exhaustion to weigh her down, the voice inside would speak again. Run! She fell, tripped by a protruding root, landing heavy enough for something in her to crack. Through gritted teeth, she screamed. The pain lanced through her leg, up her body, then slowly, with each passing throb, melded with the rest. Everything ached. Everything burned. For a time, she just laid there, her face in the mud. Night rain fell on her broken body, washing away her tears and the blood. Run, the voice said, angrier now. Finally, she responded. I can't, she cried. Her voice raged as the rest of her. I can't. The voice quieted. Time passed. Exhaustion and pain braided together sent her to sleep. In her dreams, she saw flashes of what had come before. Head Mistress Telsey, standing in her dormitory room, the Arbiter of Thorns beside her. You have been chosen, Telsey said. The war of Ionia requires new weapons. Old weapons. The Arbiter's rough hands on her temples. Flashes of fire in her vision. The fever. The heat. The voice. The voice. Wake! She woke with a start of a lurch to the side, searching for any danger. The rain had stopped, and a calm silence had fallen over the woods, broken only by the wind whistling through the trees and the distant hooting of an owl. No danger, at least for now. Slowly, with very wavery arms, she lifted herself, then turned onto her back. Her knee cracked again, sending agony through the whole leg. She held the scream at bay until the pain faded to its old dull throb. She gazed up past the swaying branches above, seeing stars through the clouds. Memories of happier times floated by. She remembered laying in the Fenworth fields with her grandmother, as they named the constellations above. The Fox, the Lyre, the Hope. Above her now, shining bright, was the Witch. Her favorite. Emotion started to weld inside her. She let out a single sob, which steamed against the winter chill. Cold. Cold! She hadn't even noticed, but the chill had numbed her fingers and feet. She was freezing. She sat up fast, hugged herself, wiping the wet mud from her body as best as she could. She breathed much faster this time, panic setting in. The shivering started. The voice spoke again. A new word. Fire. She limped from the tree to another tree in the darkness, searching for dry branches and leaves, anything she could burn. But the earlier rain had blanketed the woods and left everything sodden. The shivering had stopped. Her pain had faded. She was about ready to give in and let the cold take her. When ahead, a small clearing, her eyes caught the moonlight gleaming off a slick stump of a large felled tree. She narrowed her focus, looked closer, and spotted a deep notch carved into its surface. Her heart soared. A way tree. A way tree! Such trees had been a common sight in her youth, dotted throughout the woodlands. They were used as markers by the Empire's scouts, and housed preserved food and other camping supplies as well. Slowly, she limped forward, every step an agony, until she reached the stump. She fumbled inside its hollow, hoping to find something, anything that might help her. There, her frozen fingers clutched something thin and brittle. Kindling, she pulled out a bundle of sticks, tied neatly with twine. Inside was more: flint, ember leaves, dried beef, and a handful of wild mushrooms. Soon enough, the fire was built. She sat by its sputtering infancy, hugging her knees and chewing absently on the beef. It was old and barely edible, but she didn't care. With the fret of imminent danger racing, she allowed herself a moment to think. Head Mistress Telsey must be furious, she thought, as she started and stared into the blossoming flames. The old lady was a stern and brittle thing, with a lined and haggard face that would fall into a scowl more easily than a smile. She would have locked the conservatory down by now, and sent both scouting contingents out to search for her. Oh, Finn, she sighed. He was the conservatory's first scout, a gentleman with kind eyes who found people like her, gifted people, and offered them a home. He had arrived at her grandmother's cottage just a few weeks after her passing, when the other villagers had all but exiled her. While the Empire at large saw the value of mages, some of the more remote settlements like Fenworth still clung to old mistrusts. Witch, they called her. Witch. She remembered all those hateful eyes. She remembered begging for help, all the doors closed before her, the loneliness. And then, one summer's day, Finn Retrick had arrived to offer her something beautiful. Hope. She kicked the fire with her good leg. The wood cracked, and the flames danced out again. Warming her face, she gazed into the flickering light once more, deep in thought. Surely, Finn couldn't have known what Telsey would do. He was so kind to me. He was so... She paused, noticing something odd before her. The fire seemed to be taking shape, creating a faint outline for a moment before collapsing away into nothing. She frowned, watching on as it happened again, then again. The same shape, the same collapse. She glanced up higher in the fire and noticed two dark holes in a burgeoning blaze. They reminded something. Still, they remained still. The black as night. No matter how bright the flames around them burned, she looked closer. No, they're not holes, she realized. They were eyes. Emmeline! She froze at the mention of her own name. The flames licked up, but the eyes held firm, fixed on her. She stared back, her skin crawling. What is this? Emmeline asked, her voice wavering. But she knew. She remembered what head Mistress Telsey had called it. The gift. Something that would make Emmeline stronger. Something that would make her more than just a mage. You are a queen, Telsey had told her, and it is your crown. Emmeline, the voice grew the flames. It rattled inside her, shaking her bones. Witness! The fire began shifting, creating shapes and patterns that put her in mind of events that she'd never even seen before. There, a stone cathedral, tall and magnificent. At its entrance, an armored titan made war, scattering the desperate mortal fighters before him with a heavy and cruel mace. By his side were two fearsome beasts, one made of shadow, the other of fire. Witness! Emmeline felt herself drawn towards the second beast. She peered closer. It was huge, with too many broad, burning arms and a pulsating flame. It seemed a head bellowing out rage that twisted and withered its enemies with unholy fire. The flames flared before Emmeline. A pale woman smiled. At her feet lay the metal titan, destroyed. The two beasts that served them were beaten, forced back. Bed figures surrounded them, chanting in a tongue unknown to her. How the two raged. Emmeline saw them falter. She saw their strength sapped until their power was dwindled down into two droplets, small as rain. Emmeline followed the droplet of raging fire, trapped now inside a small warden vial. Days, months, years passed. It lay untouched, locked away, dwindling desperate. The spirit abed. The light began to wane. Its roars fell into wails. Emmeline felt something unexpected well inside her. It was pity. The flames flared again. She saw the Arbiter of Thorns, riding silently in a carriage. Ahead stood the great Raven Bloom Conservatory. The droplet of fire fell from its cage onto a bare forehead. Then screaming, shackles, and fire. Fire! Stop! A voice cried out, and Emmeline snapped from her trance. The two black eyes blazed with fury mere inches from her face. She felt something below, heat. That's what she felt. She felt heat. Emmeline looked down to see what was standing in the fire pit, flames lapping at her ankles. Just as the pain began to set in, just as she opened her mouth to scream, a cloaked figure crashed into her, knocking her clear. She slammed into the mud, coughing smoke and embers from the fire. The figure picked himself up, breathing hard. Gods, woman! What were you doing? Emmeline turned away, smoke still burning in her throat. She laid there, coughing, and despotent, until the needles in her lungs calmed. She finally spoke. "I can't go back," she said, her voice feeble and hoarse. "You don't know what she would do to me." "Who?" said the strange figure as he places their hand on her shoulder. "Headmistress Telsey," Emmeline replied. She squeezed her eyes shut, expecting to feel steel restraints closing around her wrists once more. "Who?" he repeated, and this time the confusion was ripe in his voice. Emmeline turned to find a slight man peering at her in a gloom, his eyes full of worry. He was a stranger to her, and evidently she was a stranger to him. "Who are you?" she asked. The man turned and sat on the fallen tree beside him. "I'm Gregory," he started, calm as he could muster. "Just a simple traveler, bound for the frontier, nothing more." "And you?" "Emmeline." "Are you hurt, Emmeline?" She checked her legs. The charred soles of her boots had taken the brunt of the heat, and her laces had been lost to the fire. She pulled at the scorched leather to examine her feet, and found them unhurt, save from the blisters and bruises she earned while fleeing the conservatory. She frowned. "Just my knee," she murmured, pushing through the ruined boots aside. "But not from..." She looked over to where the fire had burnt, and saw the wood scattered by the fall. The pit was little more than smoke and embers now, glowing impotently as the sunrise approached. Emmeline looked for the dark eyes and found nothing. "Well, between that and your bare feet, there's 2 reasons not to travel on foot, Gregory said. He eyed Emmeline carefully, suspicious. But in the fledgling dawn light, he saw only a young and desperate woman. "My cart is just a short way here," he said, pointing through the trees. "I could take you to the nearest town. The healers there could..." "No." Emmeline was quick with her refusal. Towns were too dangerous, especially here. Telsey's scouts would be waiting. "Well, I won't leave you like this." She looked over to Gregory again, searching for a badge or a pin or a pattern somewhere on his clothes that resembled the Ravenbloom sigil. Nothing. "You should," she said. Gregory nodded slowly. "Would you like to eat at least? I have meat pies on my wagon, fresh from the baker's oven 2 villages back." Emmeline fell silent for a moment, trying to fend off the grumbling in her stomach. She failed. "Yes, I would." By the time the 2 finished their meal, dawn had fully broken, and a frigid winter sun had broken through the crooked tree lines. Alongside the pie, Gregory had shared a cold flagon of cow's milk, and a handful of sweetened chestnuts. Afterward, he joined Emmeline on the stump of the way tree. He sketched a misshapen map of Noxus into the mud before pointing out all the places he'd already visited on his travels. Emmeline watched quietly. This man, Gregory the Grey, was a lively and spirited fellow. His tale about the drunken basilisk Krug whisperers even brought a shadow of a smile on her face, although it was faint and fleeting. His story is complete. Silence fell on their small camp. Gregory leaned back and glanced over the ruined fire pit. "Would you tell me what happened?" he asked, soft as a leaf. Emmeline pursed her lips. "Show me where you're going," she demanded, ignoring his question and towing the dirt map instead. Gregory nodded. He reached over with his charred stick and tapped the edge of the sketch. There, over the mountains, as north gets. What's there? Gregory shrugged. Nothing. Plains, valleys. I hope to make a home there. And you? Well, where will the wind take you? Emmeline bowed her head, deep in thought. She'd thought of both Drongne and even somewhere as distant of Tunkolgul, but now, in the clear light of day, both seemed so close, so obvious. She couldn't trust her old neighbors in Fendworth, and heading south to the capital would only tempt fate. Emmeline thought back to a phrase she often heard the others whisper in the conservatory. The rose is everywhere. The rose is everyone. No, she would have to go somewhere new, somewhere unexplored. Would you take me with you? Gregory fell silent. Emmeline slowly turned to see him look at her, his eyebrows raised. I could leave once we neared the border, she continued. I won't be any trouble. I can hunt and cook, I can... Gregory held his hands up, laughing softly. I will take you as far as you please, Emmeline. On one condition. Emmeline waited as he leaned over. It's a long way to the north. Will you tell me some stories of your own? You won't like any of my stories, Gregory the Grey, she sighed. Maybe not, but I will still like to hear them. By noon, Gregory mounted his horse and resumed his journey, with Emmeline hiding between sacks of food and loose lumber in the cart behind. The cart's rocking, the blanket's warmth, and her own exhaustion soon had the soft pull of sleep tugging at her spirit once more. Darkness took her, and in her sleep, she finally dared to dream of a quiet and peaceful land far away from all who would hope to hurt her.